Imagine this. You tell yourself once again, this time it will be different. You promise you won't beg for affection, that you won't accept crumbs. But a few weeks go by. That person starts to pull away, to reply coldly. And without realizing it, you're once again checking your phone, wondering what you did wrong, feeling small, almost worthless. You tell yourself it's destiny, that maybe you're not enough, that something in you is broken. Today, we're going to look at this pattern from a completely different place, from Jungian psychology. We're going to see why your low self-esteem didn't appear out of nowhere, why it's not your fault, and how it's deeply tied to your shadow. And most importantly, we're going to see, step by step, what you can start doing today to stop repeating this same story in your emotional life. When we talk about low self-esteem, we almost always reduce it to phrases like "I don't love myself," "I don't value myself," "I don't have confidence." But if we look at it from the perspective of Carl Jung and analytical psychology, low self-esteem isn't just a self-love issue. It is the tip of the iceberg of something much deeper, a fracture between who you think you are and who you really are. Between your persona, your mask, and your shadow, everything you've hidden from yourself in order to emotionally survive. What you feel in your relationships, that sense that you're always less, that you're always chosen second, that you have to earn love so someone will stay as a consequence of that inner fracture. Let's put it into scenes that are probably familiar to you. Think of that person you like, the one you have intense conversations with, where you feel connection, chemistry, laughter. One day you notice a small change. They take longer to reply, they leave you on read, their answers get shorter. On the outside, in your appearance, you stay calm. You keep writing as if nothing happened. You crack jokes. You show yourself relaxed. That's your persona, your social mask trying to look strong. But inside, something collapses. Thoughts appear like, "They're probably sick of me. I must have said something stupid. Of course, someone like that would never really choose me." What gets activated inside, that whirlwind of insecurity, isn't just low self-esteem. It is your shadow speaking with the voice of the past. The shadow, in Jung's language, is everything you've been putting away into a dark room inside you. Not only the bad, but everything you learned was not acceptable to show: your sensitivity, your anger, your vulnerability, your need to be seen, your need for affection, your creativity, your intuition. As a child, you began to detect which parts of you were welcome and which ones bothered, made others uncomfortable, were judged or ridiculed. And in order to belong, to be loved, you started putting those parts into that dark room. Over time, you were left with a presentable version of yourself, what we call the persona, the mask you wear for the world. But here is what almost nobody sees. Every time you hide a real part of yourself to be accepted, your self-esteem pays the price. Because self-esteem, in a deep sense, is the feeling that you are allowed to exist as you are, without having to hide. If, for someone to love you, you have to silence what you feel, minimize your needs, swallow your boundaries, pretend to be strong when you're actually breaking inside, you're sending a direct message to your unconscious: as I am, I'm not enough. I have to become someone different in order to deserve love. That message, repeated for years, becomes a complex. In analytical psychology, a complex is like a small emotional core in the personal unconscious that gets easily activated and alters the way you think and feel. When we talk about low self-esteem, we can imagine a complex of inferiority in love, a set of memories, emotions, and beliefs that gets triggered every time someone matters to you. Imagine this complex as a button. When someone looks at you coldly, when they don't respond the way you hoped, when they reject you, that button gets pushed without you noticing. Suddenly, you're no longer an adult handling a specific situation. You're the child version of yourself who felt they weren't enough for mom, for dad, for that first love who humiliated you, for that group that laughed at you. Your disproportionate reactions don't come from being crazy or overdramatic. They come from that complex being activated. And here's where most people get it wrong. They try to fix low self-esteem by changing only their thoughts, repeating nice phrases in front of the mirror, but without looking at what's in that inner button, without checking what the shadow is really holding. Now, then, what does all this have to do with your relationships, with that feeling that you always end up with people who hurt you, who don't choose you, who seem destined to show up in your life? Just to break you a bit more, from a Jungian perspective, your bonds aren't random. They're not punishments from the universe, but they're not pure luck either. Your personal unconscious and the collective unconscious operate like a kind of magnet. The personal unconscious holds your experiences, your wounds, your traumas, your unmet needs. The collective unconscious, on the other hand, is that deeper level shared by all humanity, where archetypes live, universal images like the wounded lover, the savior, the victim, the persecutor, the nurturing mother, the authoritarian father, the hero, the shadow. When you fall in love, you're not just seeing the person in front of you. You're seeing, without knowing it, a mix between that real person and the archetypes you carry inside, blended with your past experiences. Many of the patterns you repeat have to do with the fact that you are trying, again and again, to resolve something old with a new face. You look for in a partner what you didn't get from your mother or father. Or you replay the role of the one who gets left, the one who isn't enough, the one who begs for crumbs. And here is where it gets interesting. As long as you don't know your shadow, you will keep calling fate what are actually unconscious. Repetitions. Think of those coincidences that impact you so much. You meet someone on the very day you said you no longer believe in love. They sit next to you in an unlikely place. You have a deep conversation. You run into each other again and again in different circumstances. You tell yourself, this has to be destiny, a sign from the universe, from a Jungian point of view. This can also be read as synchronicity, external events that seem to coincide meaningfully with your inner world. But be careful. Just because there is synchronicity doesn't mean the relationship is the right person to love you well. Sometimes synchronicity puts in front of you exactly the kind of person who activates your deepest wound so that you finally see it. The problem is that instead of asking, what part of my shadow is involved here, you ask, why am I not enough for this person? What almost nobody asks is, what an image of love am I projecting onto this person? Because another key piece in Jungian psychology is projection. To project means to see in the other something that is really in you, in your shadow, in your desires, in your fears. For example, if your shadow carries the belief I'm not valuable enough, I have to prove it. It's very likely you'll feel attracted to people who seem cold, distant, hard to win. It's not that you like suffering for no reason. It is that this dynamic fits perfectly with your inner script. Someone who seems inaccessible and you doing your absolute best to win their attention. Every time you get a gesture, a message, a date, you feel a rush of value. Every time they pull away, you fall into a pit. Your self-esteem becomes completely hijacked by that projection. Picture an everyday scene. You're sitting with your phone in your hand, checking when was the last time that person was online. You see they were active, but didn't reply to you. Immediately thoughts appear. They're probably talking to someone else. They're ignoring me because I don't matter. If I were interesting, they'd have answered by now. Notice this. None of those phrases describe facts. They're interpretations soaked in your shadow. Instead of seeing a concrete behavior, someone not texting back, you fill it with the content of your inferiority complex. I'm not enough. Projection makes you see, in the other, that inner judge you've been carrying for years. And here comes the most uncomfortable part. When you meet someone who actually looks at you, pays attention to you, listens to you, treats you with respect, very often your reaction isn't relief, but discomfort. You feel that something is missing, that there's no spark, that they don't move you that much, and you might sabotage that relationship by pulling away, making excuses, feeling suffocated by someone who simply values you. Has that happened to you? It's very hard to see, but from the shadow-esque logic it makes sense. Your unconscious is more familiar with the role of begging, proving, being less. What's healthy feels strange. What hurts feels familiar. That's how strong the shadow's programming over your self-esteem can be. Now then, where does that low self-esteem come from? The one that clings so tightly to painful love stories. It doesn't appear suddenly in adulthood. It usually has roots in very early experiences, recorded in the personal unconscious. Maybe you grew up with very critical caregivers, who pointed out your mistakes more than your successes. Every gesture of disapproval got recorded in your body and mind as I am not enough. Maybe you experienced abandonment, emotional neglect, absent parents, or parents so full of their own problems that they couldn't really see you. The child you couldn't say, "My parents are wounded and don't know how to love." The only conclusion they could reach was, "I don't deserve more. Something must be wrong with me." Those childish conclusions don't vanish with age. They become deep beliefs, complexes. And every time a current situation emotionally resembles those early experiences, the complex gets triggered. Analytical psychology shows how these complexes work almost like little personalities inside your personality that sometimes take over. That is why one part of you might know rationally that you shouldn't chase someone who doesn't value you, but another part leads you again and again to text them, to apologize for things that aren't your fault, to accept conditions that go against your dignity. It's as if there were a child inside you saying, "Please, this time stay. I'll do anything." That voice isn't a shameful weakness. It's the mark of your shadow asking to be cared for. The shadow, then, is not your enemy. It is not the dark side in the moral sense that we're so afraid of. From a Jungian perspective, the shadow is that storehouse of repressed aspects, but also of undeveloped potential. In your shadow there isn't just pain. There's also strength, creativity, the ability to set boundaries, dignity, healthy anger that protects you, intuition that recognizes what doesn't do you good. But because all of that was once punished, ridiculed, or ignored, you expelled it along with the shame. The result is that you go through life with a constant sense of being incomplete, dependent on external approval, especially in the emotional realm. This is where other key Jungian concepts come in, anima and animus. Jung described anima as the image of the feminine in a man's unconscious, and animus as the image of the masculine in a woman's unconscious. Beyond gender, we can understand them as internal images of the other, of the partner, of the complement. Very often, when you feel someone is your soulmate from the very first moment, what has happened is that this person fits perfectly with the anima or animus image you carry within. You project onto them a fantasy of completeness. If she loves me, then I finally have value. I'm finally complete. The problem is that this idealized projection usually collides sooner or later with reality. The real person can't hold that role of savior, of perfect soulmate. Contradictions appear, ambivalence, behaviors that don't fit your ideal. And every step that person takes toward showing themselves as human, limited, ambiguous, you experience as a threat to your value. You don't just feel like you're losing a person. You feel like the idea, if they love me, then I'm worthy, is collapsing. That's why, when something breaks in a relationship like this, it's not just pain over the loss. It's an earthquake in your self-esteem. But here's what almost nobody sees. The real problem was never that person, but the power you handed them to define your worth. What Jungian psychology proposes is not that you stop believing in love or soulmates, but that you understand that the first big bond that needs healing is the one you have with yourself, with your own shadow. As long as you delegate to someone else the task of loving you, validating you, telling you that you're enough, your self-esteem will always be in the hands of forces you can't control. In contrast, when you start the process of individuation, that path where you integrate your repressed parts, recognize your inner archetypes, differentiate yourself from family and collective mandates, your value stops depending so much on whether someone stays or leaves. Individuation isn't an abstract concept. It's a very concrete process that shows up daily in small decisions. For example, when you notice you're about to send a desperate message to someone who isn't replying, and instead of doing it you ask yourself, what part of me feels this desperate right now? What old story is being activated? That second of awareness is individuation. Instead of acting from the complex, you relate to it. Instead of letting your shadow drive, you sit next to it and listen. That strengthens your self-esteem much more than receiving a message from that person. Up to this point, it might sound like all of this is very interesting but hard to put into practice. Let's bring it down to earth. How can you detect, in your daily life, that it's your shadow and not reality speaking about your worth? A clear sign is disproportionate intensity. If someone you just met takes a few hours to reply and you feel a nearly physical fear of being abandoned, it's very likely a complex has been activated. Your body reacts as if you were in real danger. Your heart races. It's hard to breathe. You feel pressure in your chest. That reaction isn't explained only by what's happening today, but by everything associated with it in your history. Another sign is the kind of automatic thoughts that appear. If your mind quickly jumps to not enough, if they leave me, it's because I don't deserve love. This always happens to me. You're hearing the voice of your shadow, not a universal truth. Here's where we usually fall into the trap. Instead of questioning those thoughts, we use them as a compass. If I feel small, then I must be small. If I suffer for someone, then it must be true love. If this relationship destabilizes me, then it has to be my soulmate. Because I've never felt something like this, and we confuse intensity with depth, drama with destiny. From a Jungian point of view, we could say you're being carried away by an archetype, tragic love, the sacrificed lover, the hero who suffers to win someone who isn't right for them. The collective unconscious is full of these stories, and you, without realizing it, may be acting them out in your own life. Now then, what can you do in the short term to start getting out of this circle? It's not about fixing your whole history in 24 hours, but you can take very concrete steps in Jungian self-observation that change your direction. Let's look at a small practical package you can apply starting today. First step. Detect an active projection. Think of a person who currently has a lot of power over your self-esteem. Someone around whom you feel you deflate or inflate depending on how they treat you. Take a few minutes, maybe later, to write down what you believe this person thinks of you. Be honest. They probably think I'm boring. They must think I'm too much. They think I'm not enough, whatever comes up. Then ask yourself, where do I know these phrases from? Who made me feel like this before? When did I first feel this way? Almost always, if you follow the thread, you'll find childhood or teenage scenes where you felt the same. That is where the projection clears. You realize you're not just feeling because of this current person. You're feeling for all the times your shadow carried that message. Seeing this doesn't erase the pain, but it gives you your power back. It is no longer the truth about me. It's my story repeating. Second step, dialoguing with the wounded shadow. Tonight, before going to sleep, instead of staying stuck to your screen, close your eyes and bring to mind the image of the child you were when you felt smaller, when you compared yourself. When they made you feel that you didn't measure up. You don't need to recall something traumatic, just a moment where you felt small. Imagine approaching that child from the adult you are today. Don't judge them. Don't scold them for being so sensitive. Say something like, I understand why you believed you didn't have value. With what you lived through, it was logical to think that. But today I'm here with you. Today I will stay by your side even if others go. This exercise, although simple, is deeply Jungian. You're acknowledging an inner figure, beginning to integrate a part of your shadow. And the most important thing, you're changing the message your self-esteem receives right at the moment it used to receive abandonment. Along with these steps, it's very powerful to review the phrases you use to justify what happens to you in love. Many times we use the language of destiny to cover up the shadow's action. For example, when you say if they don't stay with me, it's because they weren't meant for me, it can sound healing, but often hides a bitter resignation. They decided I'm not enough. From a Jungian perspective, you can reframe that phrase. Instead of they weren't my destiny, you can say, this relationship has shown me which part of my shadow still believes it only deserves crumbs. My destiny is not written only by what others do, but by what I do with what happens to me. It's not about repeating it as an empty mantra, but using those words to remember that you have an active role in your individuation process. Another very common phrase is, if it hurts this much, it's because they were my soulmate. From the shadow, intense pain is confused with authentic love. But you can reframe it like this. If it hurts this much, it's because this person touched a very old wound. I don't know if they were my soulmate, but I do know they showed me something I need to look at. Again, the focus shifts from the other to your inner world. That's deeply Jungian. Instead of staying stuck on the surface of events, you read their meaning for your individuation process. You might now be asking, and what does the collective unconscious have to do with my concrete low self-esteem, with my personal story? Much more than it seems. We live in a culture that glorifies certain archetypes, the suffering lover, the hero who endures humiliation for love, the person who gives everything for someone difficult, movies, songs. Novels reinforce the idea that the more you erase yourself, the bigger your love is. Without realizing it, you may have internalized these archetypes to the point of believing that giving up your boundaries, tolerating disrespect, putting up with indifference, is proof of true love. Your shadow applauds that role because it feels familiar. But your self-esteem breaks a little more every time. Becoming aware of the archetypes that inhabit you is starting to choose different stories. You can recognize inside you the archetype of the victim, for example, and instead of judging it, listen to what it comes to say. I am tired of the same things always happening to me. You can recognize the savior, that part of you that gets hooked on damaged people to try to change them. And instead of staying on automatic pilot, ask yourself, what do I really need beyond saving others? Every time you do this, your self-esteem reorients inward, toward your own center, instead of revolving around someone else. Here comes something very freeing, even if it's uncomfortable at first. Your low self-esteem is not a fixed label. It is a state that stays in place as long as you keep treating your shadow like trash. Every time you talk to yourself with contempt, every time you say, "I'm so stupid, of course they left me, who'd want to be with me?" You're repeating the same inner mistreatment you once received from outside. You are not just a victim of what others did to you. You become an accomplice when you repeat that treatment toward yourself. This is not to blame you, on the contrary. It's to show you where your power lies. You can't change what others did, but you can decide to stop being the one who abandons you. Imagine that your inner world is a house with many rooms. For years, so that others would come in and feel comfortable, you kept closing doors. Here we don't show sadness. Here we don't show anger. Here we don't show desire. Here we don't show needs. You only left the main living room open, where you show yourself as nice, pleasing, easy to love. But the closed rooms are still full of life. From there, the shadow pushes, sometimes with symptoms, with anxiety, with intense jealousy, with obsessions in love. Integrating the shadow is about opening those doors little by little, carefully, with respect. And each time you open one, your self-esteem gets stronger because you can inhabit more of yourself. You might be wondering, and what about soulmates? Is it all projection and shadow? Is there no such thing as an authentic, deep connection? From a Jungian perspective, we could say that there are indeed very meaningful bonds, encounters that seem marked by a special synchronicity. People with whom you can advance a lot in your individuation process. But the thermometer of whether a relationship is of the soul shouldn't be how much suffering it causes you, but how much it helps you to find yourself. A relationship that constantly destroys your self-esteem, that makes you feel less, that forces you to shut down parts of yourself to sustain it, can be very intense and very archetypal. But that doesn't make it healthy. Sometimes, the most transformative relationship is the one that, without so much drama, invites you to show yourself as you are, confronts you with your shadows without humiliating you, and walks beside you as you grow. The key is that, to be able to choose this kind of bond, you need to be willing to let an identity die. The identity of the self that only recognizes itself through being chosen, chased, abandoned. That self is very tied to your complexes, your history, your masks. Letting it go can feel like a small grief, because it has been your way of moving through the world. But on the other side there is something Jung would call the self, that deeper center of your personality that doesn't depend so much on masks or roles, and that has an intrinsic dignity. When you begin to live a bit more from there, your self-esteem no longer needs to be proven in every relationship. It becomes a baseline state. I know I have value even if not everyone stays. I know I deserve respect even if someone can't give it to me. Before moving to the close, I want to make something very clear that can bring a lot of relief to your heart. It is not your fault that you built low self-esteem. You were a child. You did what you could with what you had. If you had to please, stay silent, over-adapt to get a little love, that was a survival strategy, not a defect. What is in your hands now, as an adult, is to decide whether you will continue living from that strategy or whether you will begin to relate to your shadow in a different way. As long as you keep blaming yourself for not being enough, your shadow will remain in the dark. In contrast, when you say, "I understand where this comes from. It's not my fault, but now it is my responsibility," something rearranges inside. You stop being only a victim and start becoming the protagonist of your process. And now, To finish, I want to invite you to something very concrete. Today, before going to sleep, take a piece of paper and write down 3 things. First, a recent situation where you felt less in a relationship, even if it was something small. Second, the exact phrases that came into your mind about yourself in that moment. Third, write, from the adult you are, a different response for that moment. For example, situation, they didn't answer my message all day. Automatic thoughts, they don't care about me. I'm a burden, they probably found someone better. New response, it hurts that they don't answer, and it's valid that it hurts. But their silence speaks about them, not about my worth. I'm not going to chase someone who isn't showing interest. Today, I choose to stay with myself. This small exercise won't solve everything. But if you repeat it, your mind begins to associate difficult situations not only with the old script, but with a new inner voice that supports you. In the next 3 days, observe your reactions in love as if you were a kind researcher of your own psyche. Every time you feel a strong pull in your self-esteem, ask yourself, is this really about today, or is it my shadow remembering something old? Don't judge yourself for the answers. Just look at them. That compassionate gaze is already integration. And the next time you catch yourself thinking, if they leave me, it's because they weren't meant for me. Remember this, destiny is not a capricious force that decides whether you are worthy or not. From a Jungian perspective, your destiny is built every time you bring into consciousness something that used to be in the shadow and choose differently, even if it's just by a millimeter. If this message resonates with you, if you feel you've seen a bit more clearly where your low self-esteem comes from and how your shadow has been writing your love story, I invite you to keep exploring this inner world. Not to analyze yourself endlessly, but to live with more freedom, with more conscious bonds, with a more honest relationship with yourself. You can subscribe, share this video with someone you know who feels less in their relationships, or simply come back and listen to this content again when you need it. The most important thing is this: you are not your wound. You are not your complex. You are not the story that has repeated itself until now. You are the one who, today, is choosing to look inside with courage. And from there, your shadow stops being the prison of your self-esteem and becomes the place where, little by little, you begin to recover yourself whole.